Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this lovely Friday afternoon. I hope that you're all sitting on your front decks with your feet up, maybe in your pajamas still, and ready to get educated. We're going to give it another minute or two for a few more people to sign on, and then we'll start. This weekend is supposed to be beautiful weather too. It'll be nice. 60, 70 degrees and sunny. So for all of you that are here and have joined us, feel free to write your questions as you have them in the chat box. You can also use the question and answer if you prefer. We're going to do this very interactively. So if you have a question as we're going through it, please make sure that you write that either in the chat or the question and answer area so that we can take care of it right away. We're not going to necessarily wait till the very end. So I'm going to get started. I want to thank you all again for being here on such a wonderful day. We're all excited to get Connecticut reopened and to have our businesses up and running and have everything return to normal. And in order to do that, though, there has to be quite a bit of thinking and analysis. There's a lot of guidelines. There's a lot of additional guidelines on top of the guidelines. Every industry has another set of guidelines, and every town has a set of guidelines. And so it's really important for every business before they open to make sure that they analyze all of these multiple sets of guidelines and come up with a very clear plan. And that includes, employee manuals and policy manuals and all kinds of good stuff like that. So today we have as our guests the Small Business Development Center, who have been the absolute best partners for our Chamber of Commerce. I think at some point I have to pay Greg Lewis some kind of like therapy, amount of money, because every Friday it seems I'm calling with, oh my God, what do we do? And so he's been very good and very responsive to answer all of our questions. And I want to thank you, Matt, for being here, and Greg, and taking time out of your busy day. I know you have hundreds of clients, and you're extremely busy. So I'll let you two take it from here. If you'd like to give yourselves a quick intro, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you very much for having us. It's great to be able to work with you in the Windham Chamber. You've been a great partner during all of this and a great resource for the businesses in your region. So thank you very much. My name is Matt Pugliese. I'm the Associate State Director with the Connecticut Small Business Development, and I'm glad to have my colleague Greg Lewis, who is a business advisor with us. And Greg works with the Windham Chamber and in the Windham area. The Connecticut Small Business Development Center, for those of you that aren't familiar with us, we are an SBA resource partner. So we're funded by the U.S. Small Business Administration and Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development through grants. And we're hosted by the UConn School of Business. And for all of you, we provide free business consulting services. And over the last 2 months now, we've been very busy helping people navigate EIDL and PPP and other critical decisions that they have to make. And now as Connecticut, moves to reopen, we're here today to help you start to think about this. Reopening your business is going to be a very stressful decision for all of you. We understand that. So Steve, we can get into the first slide. So where do you even start with this? The way that we're going to go through this conversation today is we've really looked at 5 points, and it's not just an order of operations where you can just go and check off the list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each decision you make is going to really take into account several other pieces. So first off, we have the reopening parameters that the state of Connecticut is setting for each individual industry. And as you look to understand those, that's going to impact your costs and it's going to impact your income. You're going to have a bunch of decisions to make in terms of safety and training. Well, not really decisions. We're seeing a note that we're not seeing the slide. Do you have that, Steve?
Steve, are you there?
Yep, I'm right here. Is my screen being shared?
No.
No.
All right.
There you go.
All right.
There we are. Thank you so much, Liz. So where do we start? Again, reopening parameters, what the state says we have to do within our industries. This is going to have impact on our income. It's going to have impact on our costs. We're going to have several things that we need to do in terms of safety and training to make sure that our staff is safe, to make sure that our customers are safe. We're going to want to build our customer confidence, because if we're open and nobody comes, it doesn't really make a difference. And then we're going to need to communicate all of this to all of our stakeholders. So that's the process that we're going to walk through with you today. And feel free to ask questions along the way. And then we'll also do general questions at the end. So the state of Connecticut, next slide, has outlined a series of parameters for phase 1 of reopening, and it allows certain businesses to operate under various safety measures and restrictions. It's important that you understand the guidelines for your specific industry, but also consider how these guidelines are going to affect your ability to operate and how they're going to impact your bottom line. Ultimately, whether it's the right time for you to open or not is a decision that you need to make. It's not just something that you want to say, I'm opening my doors on the 20th because I can. So you really want to do the research and the homework on the backside. The Department of Economic and Community Development released a series of guides indicating not only which businesses may reopen on the 20th, but also the specific requirements of each industry to reopen safely. And as of last night, the self-certification that the DECD was talking about over the last several days is now on the website. And as of yesterday evening, it's now required for businesses that are opening. Next slide. So you really want to make sure that you understand the parameters for your industry. This is really critical because it's going to drive the decisions that you need to make. It's going to drive your financial analysis. The state of Connecticut has outlined these parameters. And we've highlighted a couple of points per industry here, but we really recommend you visit the link on the screen, the Connecticut Coronavirus Portal, to download the full guidelines for your industry. If you have questions on these and how they impact you, then to follow up with DECD or follow up with your local health department and zoning department for more information. We'll go next slide, Greg.
Okay, hi everyone. As you think about how you're going to open, when you're going to open, obviously the first thing you're going to have to consider is, if my capacity is reduced by 50%, but my expenses aren't reduced by that same amount, essentially you'd be operating in the hole and getting deeper and deeper into that hole. So you have to think about, what can you do in order to stay afloat? In some cases, it may not make sense for you to open economically, but in order to figure that out, you need to sit down and do the calculations. At the SBDC, we have a tool called Bottom Line, which we're happy to work with you on if you're one of our clients. If you're not a client, you're more than welcome to sign up, and we don't charge for our services. We are funded jointly by the SBA, Small Business Administration, and Connecticut's Department of Economic and Community Development. So what we can do is we can send you some relatively simple input sheets. You put in the information about your business, typically how much revenue do you normally expect, what are your expenses. We can take a look at that, and then we can start to run some scenarios. We can take a look at what happens when all of a sudden you're at 50% revenue as opposed to 100%. But you need to keep in mind that just because you're opened, as Matt just said, that doesn't mean that even if you've got the potential to have 50% capacity, that all those people are going to show up. It may be very likely that many people are still concerned about the potential hazards to their health or to the health of their loved ones, and they simply aren't going to come to anyone's establishment, yours or anyone else's. So maybe instead of 50% capacity, you're only at 10 or 20% capacity. What does that look like on your balance sheet and on your profit and loss statement? Can you afford to reopen? And when you think about that, one of the first things you need to do is consider, well, can I reduce my expenses? Can I negotiate with my landlord? Can I negotiate with my vendors? Can we come to different terms? If you've got other outstanding loans, can you get forbearance on your loans, or can you have the loans deferred? And there's a significant difference between the two. Normally, if you get forbearance, that essentially just postpones the date at which you have to make those payments. If you can get the payments deferred, that may mean getting them stuck on the back end of your loan. So and rather than have, as soon as you're open, or at the point at which the forbearance ends, let's say it's 2 or 3 months, now you have to come up with that money. If you can get it deferred, you might get that moved to the end. So if you have a 5-year note, they just tack on an extra 3 months. That typically works out much better for you as a business owner than forbearance. But even forbearance might at least give you a little bit of breathing room. But to the extent you can have particularly longer term debt deferred, try to do that. Again, the key thing here is negotiate. Don't be afraid to communicate with the people to whom you owe money. Okay, if you want your business to survive, it means doing a lot of talking, having a lot of open communication with the people with whom you have to deal. That includes your customers, your vendors, again, whoever you typically owe money to. All right, can we have the next slide, please? All right, this is that tool I was mentioning, Bottom Line. As you can see, it's a spreadsheet. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It's in multiple sheets, however, so there isn't one. It will actually generate a cash flow statement for you, profit and loss statement, balance sheet, and several other important financial tools that are typical for any small business. If you're not familiar with how these things work, I encourage you to become familiar with how they work and not just count on or turn to your accountant for this kind of information. You typically need to have this readily available at your fingertips. And again, we can help you put something like this together so you can get a sense of, is it realistic for me to open? Or if I do open, what am I going to need to do to stay afloat until things return to something closer to normal? And keep in mind, that may be quite a while. So try to put together scenarios that give you some real options on what to do over an extended period of time. You'll notice that it includes things like fixed assets, additional inventory, your cost of goods sold. You may need to do a lot of things in your cost of goods sold, for instance. What does it cost you to make something? You may need to try to figure out ways to do that a little less expensively, or change your business model entirely. That's something we can also help you at least think about. For instance, a good example of that is restaurants that have sit-down seating are having to go to curbside service. So people drive up and they pick up their food. I have a friend who has a restaurant in Massachusetts, and interestingly, they're actually generating more revenue with curbside service than they did with sit-down service, because apparently more people don't want to have to cook at home, or they've gotten tired of cooking at home and they're turning to restaurants as an alternative source of finding their meals. So making that switch isn't necessarily a bad thing. It may work to your advantage. Okay, can we have the next slide?
So safety and training. So, I want to start off by saying that our point on safety is really looking at how it's going to impact your costs and how it's going to impact the customer confidence. In terms of, if you have specific safety guideline questions in terms of why, really go to your local health department, whether that's in your town or your region, have those questions there. So one thing that, I read earlier this week, I'm so eager for sports to come back safely. When it's appropriate. But, I was reading about the NBA and their process of considering how they should restart the league. And they said, if we have one person that gets sick and that is going to shut the league back down, then we're not putting the right process into place. And I think that was a really interesting way of thinking about it in terms of a business. If you're going to rush to reopen your doors, and if one person, a customer or a staff member getting sick is going to shut everything down, that's an interesting place to think about, what strategies you're going to put into place in terms of your operation and how important they are. So it's really about customer confidence and staff safety. And customer safety. And customer safety is the customer confidence. So on the safety side, the goal is twofold. Your business can't work without staff, and you're going to be able to need them to work in ways that are going to make, and you're going to need them to be able to feel safe and protected. And as an employer, make sure that they are safe and eliminate the liability that you have. And you want to maintain a safe workplace. That's really the guiding piece of this. If the customers don't feel safe, they're not going to come in. Implementing safety measures that make sense for your business and helps protect everyone, your staff and your customers, is going to make everybody feel more comfortable. And that's really the critical piece here. The other piece on the safety side is because of these requirements, you're not going to be able to open on May 20th unless you're able to meet all of these different safety measures that are required. So you have to take that into account in terms of when you can really set a timeline for reopening. And as Greg was talking about, if you're able to negotiate with vendors, with landlords in terms of your ability to reopen, whether or not you can meet these safety requirements, that becomes a part of your communication with them. PPE and getting enough to support your staff and support your operation is really critical. And having this kind of detail, having the kind of financial analysis around safety and the finances, it'll be very helpful as you have this conversation with your landlord and your creditors. If you have questions on how to implement the guidelines, again, talk to your local town health department for further guidance. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of different physical changes that you're going to be able to look at right now. Implementing these physical changes is meant to reduce the work-related hazards. These types of changes are at the top of the hierarchy here because they establish and reduce the exposure to hazards and don't rely on worker or customer behavior. By reducing the hazards in the workplace, physical changes are not only the most effective, but can also be the most cost-effective solutions for employers to implement. So you're going to want to think about ventilation systems, physical barriers such as the clear plastic sneeze guards, drive-through windows or ways to do curbside pickup. And again, review the DECD guidelines for your business to make sure that you're in compliance. But the important point here is that all of these safety changes are going to come with costs, and they're going to come with a timeline. And that's really going to drive this decision about when you should reopen, because you want to reopen from a place of strength when you're ready and able to do this. Next slide, please. Oh. I didn't realize there was that animation there. So I think that catches us up there. So we'll go next slide.
Okay, so customer confidence. As you can read there, everyone is experiencing high levels of stress under the circumstances. Thousands of people have lost their jobs, and not everyone is going to get to return to work, and many are worried about their health, as I already mentioned. So what are you as a business owner, how are you expected to react and respond to your customers' confidence or lack of confidence? Well, that gets to be very tricky, because you can't respond or react if you don't know what your customers are feeling. It's critically important for you to open the lines of communication. I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but this is really critically important. You've got to open lines of communication with your customers. You have to find out, well, are they anxious? If you're a hairdresser and your clients have children, for instance. I have a client who was mentioning that a lot of their clientele involves families with children. And if you're required to leave people out in the car, if you can only have one person at a time and you can't have people in a waiting area, well, what are you supposed to do if a client has two kids who want haircuts and they're both young and you can't have them both in your shop, both the children in your shop at the same time, or maybe even not even the parent? Now, you're going to need to, again, you follow up with DECD, find out what the rules are. Because as a matter of fact, I don't know what the rule is for small children, but obviously you can't leave one in the car. So how do you negotiate that? Is that stressful? This is when you're going to need to communicate to your clients, what the rules are and how you as a business owner are adapting to those rules. How are you making it possible for someone with 2 kids to actually get their hair cut? If you're not making it clear to them, they're going to be stressed, and they're going to maybe look for somebody else who can answer that question for them more easily. So think about that now before the questions start to come next week if you're considering opening. That's, again, one of the main things you have to think about. Be proactive in terms of figuring out, how can I make my customers comfortable even before they ask me the question? Communicate to them ahead of time how you're dealing with the things that make them anxious. Find out what makes them anxious and let them know, all right, these are the steps we're taking to relieve that anxiety for you. You have to take responsibility for being as much ahead of the game and ahead of their potential difficulties as you possibly can. Are there any questions right now that we should deal with before we move on? Diane?
So there are a couple of questions, not necessarily related to anything specific, but I can certainly ask them. So when you're talking about capacity, what exactly does 50% capacity mean? From your total occupancy or outdoor occupancy? This is a restaurant who's asking.
Matt, that's a really good question.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So in my town, I know right now that the place that is, the zoning office is determining that. So we had the question is it what the restaurant normally has for capacity, or is it what the fire code is for the building? So I would encourage people to reach out to their local building office, zoning office in terms of assessing capacity, especially because there may be decisions made on a town-by-town basis in terms of the potential use and expansion of outside patios and seating areas that might change this for a temporary period of time.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to add
Please.
something to that. I do think that it's important that before you open, you have a one-on-one conversation with someone in your town. Every town is supposed to have a committee about reopening, and so you should talk to that point person. The definition from DECD that we got, because we've done a couple of webinars, was specifically your 50% occupancy is what is listed or what is posted in your restaurant that was determined by your officials. So if you are only an inside restaurant and your occupancy is normally 100 people, then you can have no more than 50 people in your outside seating. Okay. Now, if you have 50 people inside and you have 50 people outside, because you currently have an outside patio, then your total occupancy is still 100, meaning on the outside, you can still have technically 50 people. So your occupancy for your restaurant is what you are currently zoned for, inside and outside combined, and then half of that. Now, but the second part of that and the caveat is you still must have all of the distancing, the 6-foot distancing. So you might be able to have 50 people outside, but the 6 feet distancing is going to make that much less. And now also remember, it's 6 feet from table to table. So if there's 2 tables like this, there's 6 feet between the 2. But if there's 2 tables in front of the other where there's chairs that are back to back, the chairs have to be 6 feet apart with somebody sitting in them. So you're probably, assuming the average person is maybe a foot wide, your tables back to back where people are sitting touching each other have to be probably about 8 feet apart. So it's 6 feet from table to table and 6 feet from chair to chair, which if you already started with a patio that had 50 people occupancy, that's probably way, way, way less. So there's 2 things that you have to consider when thinking about capacity. So I hope that is more specific in answering your question. Okay. The other question that we have is, I have a photography studio. I noticed that the only personal services able to reopen are hair salons and barbershops. Restaurants are able to open outside only. Why wouldn't I be able to offer outdoor only photo sessions where I am staying far away from clients? What are scenarios like this not being addressed? And how would I learn more information how I can plan to reopen? So All right, so, you hesitated. Let me see if I can help you answer that. As you guys are talking, I'm talking to somebody at DECD to try to get some answers. So there are a few other things that are opening in phase one. This will answer another question. Somebody who's a campground said that in phase one, which we're currently under, they're supposed to be opening outdoor recreation, but there's no guidelines for that yet. So those guidelines are supposed to come out early next week. It was supposed to be today, but it's going to be early next week. So anybody like that does campgrounds or skydiving, things like that, that'll all be defined next week. As far as outdoor photography, so we have been very clear with DECD and communicating with them on a very regular basis about what I call the weird businesses, meaning those little ones that don't fit into an absolute simple category like restaurants or retail. And they are very well aware of this, and they are going to try to come up with, hopefully by next week sometime, guidance on where some of these very unique types of businesses, where they fall and what categories they fall. They're going to update what they consider these categories. If you don't strictly fall into a retail, so if you're selling anything, or an office in the normal common sense of what an office is, with people sitting at desks and doing things like that, then, which many of us don't fall into that, then they will hopefully by next week come out with a guide or a list of what these unusual businesses or outside of the box businesses, so that you'll have better clarity as to when you can open. So I hope that answers a couple of the questions that are here in the question boxes. I was also getting some emails from them. There is another question here that I think that Valeria answered, but we'll throw it out there. I don't know anything about my EIDL loan. I applied March 23rd and I still haven't heard. Do you have any idea what I can do?
Yeah, Valeria did respond to that. And unfortunately, all we can do is tell you that you need to wait. Although let me alert you that you need to look in, if you apply for EIDL, you need to look in your spam folder to make sure that you didn't get a message from SBA. That's critically important. If you got that email, it gives you instructions. And unfortunately, apparently, a lot of those messages ended up in people's spam folders. So look for that. There is also an 800 number that you can call. I don't have that handy. But you can call and ask for information on your. I can, when we switch over to Matt, I'll look that number up and I can announce it before the webinar ends.
Great, and I guess the only thing that I would add is that on the EIDL, on the advanced side, you're not necessarily going to get any email communication that you're receiving it. Most of our clients have just had that advance deposited in their account directly. So you're going to want to look for that. The loan is where you're going to want to look in your spam to see if that shows up.
Yeah, and we did Wednesday. We had the New England SBA director, who is Wendell Davis, talking on another webinar then, and he did say that they are working through them. What people need to understand are the EIDL loans are underwritten loans, and so they require a lot of paperwork and a lot of bank accounts and a lot of information and credit checks and everything else. So they're getting millions of those. Unlike the PPP loans, which were processed much quickly, those were not underwritten. They were pretty much guaranteed, and they were based on your accurate information. So banks were able to process them very quickly because you didn't have to submit things like bank statements and credit reports and stuff like that. The EIDLs are completely underwritten loan, and they take a lot longer to process. So he did say that New England is a little bit behind because we started earlier and we weren't really, the SBA wasn't prepared for us. Connecticut was the third state to register to be allowed to offer the EIDLs, according to him. And so we have some loans that we were the first ones to offer the link to do the loan. So I guess ours were very early. He did say, however, that if somebody was having a difficult time and has not gotten any answers, that you could email him and he would look into it personally. So if you all would like to take him up on that offer, feel free to email me at the chamber. So it's Diane, D-I-A-N-E, at windhamchamber.com. let me know who you are, what your loan number is, and I will forward that to Wendell for you. And so you would be able to hopefully get a direct answer. And he's probably going to regret making that offer to people, but he did. So
well done, Diane. Well done.
and the thing is some people ask questions, you answered them as you went along. So you're doing a great job with getting information out. So I would say keep going.
All right.
All right, returning to customer confidence. A lot of this is a moving target. Last week, there was a lot of concern about, for instance, if you're a hairdresser, using blow dryers. That got changed because it was communicated via the industry association and going back and forth with the governor's office that was something that wasn't really viable for hairdressers. Again, using them as an example. Don't be afraid to discuss your specifics of your industry with your industry association. If there are things that you realize need to be altered as a consequence of these new rules, bring it up with them because perhaps you can. On the flip side of that, I'll mention that I'm an avid tennis player, and originally indoor tennis was going to be allowed to open on the 20th. That's since been rescinded. So these are all moving targets. Things are changing rapidly. So you need to remain aware of what's going on. Again, use the industry, your industry association, keep in touch with DECD. Again, we encourage you to become SBDC clients because we will do a lot of this keeping on top of things for you, and we'll share information. That's a big part of our jobs. Don't be afraid to reach out to the available resources. Diane, the chamber, don't be afraid to reach out to them for information because, again, all of these things change and they change constantly. Again, think of it as a moving target. So next slide, Steve. Okay, and then customer confidence again, messaging. You have to be clear to your customers that you understand what their concerns are, preferably because you use your social media, use Facebook, use Instagram, use whatever social media you're on, LinkedIn, whatever it happens to be, to reach out to your customers, direct email. If you normally have a newsletter, use your newsletter to do a quick survey, use SurveyMonkey, ask your customers what their concerns are, and then let them know that you're addressing those concerns. Stay on top of this, stay ahead of it as much as you possibly can. You don't want to be blindsided by something that you didn't anticipate. And it could be the difference between whether you stay in business or not. So communicate, especially with your customers. Find out what they're worried about and address it before they come to your business.
And I would add to that too, it goes both ways in terms of if you're making the decision to open on the 20th or the 21st or whatever day, you want to communicate everything that you've done so that they know it. But at the same time, if you make a decision to not open in-person dining and continue to just do carryout, explain in a transparent way to your customers why you're doing that you're doing it because it's a good business decision, because you're concerned about their safety and your employees' safety. Really be transparent. I think that we've all seen how much people have come together and been understanding and supportive of each other over the last 2 months. And so I know a lot of people, a lot of businesses have expressed to us that they feel that they have to open on the 20th because if they don't, they're going to lose their customers to a competitor. And that's really the key piece of whatever choice you are making that is right for your business, you want to explain that, whether it's to open next week or to open in 3 weeks. You want to make sure that you're communicating transparently so your customers understand that you have their best interests at heart.
And not just from the customer side. Well, let's say your customers are making it clear to you that they don't feel safe. They recognize that you've taken all these steps and they're very appreciative of the fact that you've taken those steps, but they're still not comfortable. Let's say 80% of them are saying, we're still not comfortable just yet. We want to wait another month to see how things shake out. You can then communicate that to your landlord. Let's say your landlord has been willing to has been sympathetic and willing to forego rent for some period of time. Share that information that your customers are telling you they're not ready for you to open. They're not ready to come back to your business. Share that information with your vendors and with your landlord, the people to whom you have to pay your debts. They may be willing to say, okay, we get it. So we'll work out terms. We'll stretch this out even longer, because it's not to their advantage to have you close your business. So many businesses in this country are going to be forced to close that. I mean, it's not like somebody's knocking down the door waiting to take your leased space once you close. That's more than likely not the case. It's to their advantage to keep you in place as long as possible. And that works, it works for both sides. Your customers do want to come back to you ultimately. Communicate, communicate, communicate. This is not a time to hold information close to the vest. You want to get that information out there so everybody knows where they stand.
And to Greg's point too, if you're trying to determine whether or not your customers want you to reopen, and if they feel confident, ask them. Make sure you could use a simple Facebook poll to ask people how they feel about opening up, whether they prefer dine-in or takeout. You could use a MailChimp survey that you email out if you have a mailing list. So there's some really simple tactics that you can use to get some data to help you make that decision and to communicate to your landlord.
Okay. Next slide. Okay, these are some basic precautions. As you can see, you've seen these in varying forms already, but you want to make sure that you post these. You want to make sure that you share these with your existing customers. Let them know that you're doing all of these things and more, ideally, if you can. If you're wearing face shields, let people know that you're doing that. Let them know that you're making every effort to ensure their safety and their comfort when they come back to your establishment. Again, this is not a time to withhold information. Be upfront about all the particulars related to your business. Make it clear that this with your employees as well. We've kind of skipped over employees, but it's really important that your employees and your customers and all of your stakeholders, think about all of them, have a clear understanding of what specifically your business is doing relative to this situation. If your employees feel sick, you need to make sure that they know that they're not to come to work. Make that very clear. Again, there are programs designed to help people regarding family and medical leave. There are ways that you can, as a business owner, you can access assistance for that. Again, a lot of the stuff relates to moving targets, but we do our best to keep on top of what the latest information is regarding any of these instances that you as a business owner can take advantage of, so that if you've got sick employees, you can pay them for being while they're out of work, but you also get some compensation for that. So again, you communicate. Don't be shy about asking questions and getting information to help you function. Okay, I guess next slide. Yeah, use your mailing list, social media. We've said this already. Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever. MailChimp, SurveyMonkey. Send out information, collect data, use that data. Don't just let it sit there. Actually go through the responses that you get from your customers, compile that information and share it. This is critically important. Don't be shy about getting the information and sharing it, because this is what will make your customers comfortable enough to come back to you whenever it is they choose to do so. And if you can make it clear that you've done all the things that the state or the town have required, you've done all those things, and you maybe have gone beyond that to do more to ensure their comfort and safety, let them know that. Take pictures, use Instagram to show all the things you put in place to make it clear that you've taken steps. One of the best things that happened early on was that supermarkets, for instance, put up those shields. If you take pictures, if they've taken pictures of those and they put them on their website so that potential customers can see, oh, okay, they've done these things. I see that they've done that. I now feel relatively comfortable going there. You can do that with your business as well. Be proactive in making it clear that you've done what's necessary to make your customers feel welcome back and safe.
Next slide. So the last piece is effective communication. It's, so we've spent so much time on focusing on the employees and the customers, but there's more people that you have to talk to. And, Greg hit on this in terms of talking to your industry association so that they can advocate. Diane talked about what the chamber's been doing in terms of getting all of those kind of businesses that don't fit into a big bucket category and the unique circumstances that they have. It's so important that as you encounter these little, unique barriers to your business, to think, I might not be the only one encountering this, and not just push it by the side. Talk to your town government, talk to your chamber, talk to your industry representative, call DECD, talk to your state representative. You need to communicate this so that way things can be done to address it, or you can get the question answered. And there may already be a process and a way that the town or the state is working to handle this. So let's just look back a little bit. So right now, the first thing you want to do is take a look at the measures and guidelines established by the state for you to reopen safely. You want to take those into consideration and figure out your reopening from the financial perspective, how it's going to impact your business on the income side, and how all of these reopening parameters are going to impact your expenses. For health and safety, you want to obtain the supplies you need to reopen safely and put whatever engineering parameters into place. You need to figure out how long that's going to take you to do. That's going to end up impacting your timeline about when you can really open. You want to provide training to your employees. You want to make sure that everyone is on the same page internally as to how the business is going to operate. And you want to make sure, as Greg said, that you understand all of the Department of Labor laws right now and guidance that's in place so that you can support your employees during this time. We have a lot of this information on our website, ctsbdc.com, which you can see at the bottom of the screen. We have a COVID-19 business resources page that's updated. Your industry parameters are there from the state. The Department of Labor guidance that is up to date is there. As you put these measures into place and you communicate with your staff, you want to communicate to your customers, because it doesn't matter what you do if you don't tell that story. So make sure that your customers know that. And also, again, remember, gather information from your customers. Reach out to the channels that you usually use to communicate with them and ask them what they're looking for from you right now. And whatever decision you make, whether it's to open next Wednesday or 3 weeks from now, communicate transparently with all of your stakeholders as to why you're making that decision. That's going to impact your long-term relationships and viability. And I want to I think that is next slide then. So again, Connecticut Small Business Development Center, we are a free resource that is here to help you, here to support you. We can help you with this deep dive and analysis. We can help you in terms of thinking about communication strategies. Greg is one of the many advisors that we have. We've brought on board 4 more advisors in the last month to help support us with the influx of businesses that we have due to the COVID-19 crisis. So we want to be able to help you. There's no cost to it, and we can meet with you remotely. So I think we can just go directly to questions now if we have any more that have come in. Oh, you're muted, Diane.
Thank you. I'm used to telling everybody else to do that. Sorry about that. Self-certification requires what, and what are the legal ramifications?
The self-certification information is on the DECD website. Legal ramifications, I do not have an answer for that at the moment. I think maybe we can provide some guidance to you, Diane, afterwards if you're not up to date as well. I know a lot of these changes just got pushed out last night, so.
Yeah, and we're not 100% sure. As most of you know, one of the biggest issues that many small businesses have had about reopening is what is their legal liability. So if somebody gets sick and they say that they got sick at my place, the answer to those questions are documentation, documentation, documentation. So if you're keeping a log of when the bathrooms are cleaned, and you have trained your staff to clean tables after every use in a restaurant, you show that you have talked to your employees as they have come on shift to make sure that they're healthy, and you have all of this documentation, that you should be okay. It's when you don't have the paperwork. And so I have to apologize. I was listening to you, but I wasn't sure if you told everybody that that is kind of the key here, is the extra time that it's going to take people to do all of this documentation. You have to train your staff before you open. You have to have all new policies and procedures. You have to have a new employee handbook that includes all of these extra activities and their paid FMLA under the Emergency Cares Act. You're going to need to make sure that there is a log of when every bathroom was cleaned, and it should coincide with your, not only your capacity, but your volume. So if it's getting busy, then you need to clean it every 10 minutes. If it's not busy, you could get away with every half an hour. But those are the kinds of things that you need to document. The health checks with your employees, every shift they should fill out a questionnaire saying that they don't have signs and symptoms and they feel fine, and that they understand if they feel sick during the shift that they should, tell their boss and go home. And if you keep all of that paperwork, if somebody does make a claim against you, that you will have a very good chance of, supporting yourself and defending yourself. But the self-certification is a fairly simple process. You're basically just agreeing to follow the rules. And I think that the bottom line for the liability, after having a couple of attorneys come on to another webinar, is that as long as you are showing good faith effort in following all of the procedures and the guidelines that are put out there, then you're okay. Now, the key to that is, I would say, is you need to check every day. Every single day. So somebody today sent out a link on the guidelines for barber and beauty parlors or hair salons and barbershops. And that link or that guideline was already outdated because it didn't have the blow drying can be done, if necessary comment on there. So you have to check every day, every single day, because they're changing that quickly. And as people like all of you on our webinar today are asking relevant, pertinent questions or making their concerns heard, the DECD has been very good about listening to that and trying to do their best in accommodating as much as they can. So check every day for everything. And that would be SBA. If you've got a PPP loan out, it certainly would be, as far as reopening goes, the governor's guidelines, check and make sure nothing's changed. We did put a request into them that changes should be in red so that we could see them. You should check with the Department of Labor to make sure there's no new labor issues. And the good thing is, if you belong to the chamber or you're following our chamber newsletter, then you're going to get those updates sent to you in a newsletter. But the newsletter is only as good as the people who read the newsletter. So what we try to do is look at all of these 10 or 15 different sources of information, take what we think is the most relevant for the most amount of people and include it in our newsletter. So sometimes there's 2 stories, sometimes there's 12 stories, depending on what happened that day. So that was a really long-winded answer to the question, and I apologize for that, but I think the liability issue and the self-certification right now is do your best to follow everything and you shouldn't have a problem. One of our people here said, I did the self-certification last evening and it was very quick. When you finish, you are sent posters to put on your space and a seal to put on the premises that you have complied with the guidelines. I happen to own a very small gallery gift shop, so my preps aren't anything like a restaurant or a mall, and I'm the only employee. So I think that was just reiterating that it's an easy process to do. Training of staff for restaurants. Does Serve Safe courses on COVID cover this part of staff training? Do you know the answer to that?
I don't know the answer. We can find find that out. It's something I will need to know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I'm not sure on the answer either, but I was trying to go through and find it in the restaurant guide that the DECD has on its page.
I know that the main person in the restaurant who is going to oversee all of this has to be a ServSafe person. But not every staff person in a restaurant has to be ServSafe qualified. So I suppose if you want to send your employees through that, it would be a good thing. I think the staff training that they're saying really comes down to not just in general, like a ServSafe course, but it has to be specific for your place of business. So it's good to have both. You know, you have a general course on even OSHA or a general course on disinfecting versus cleaning. But what they're looking for is that you have changed your policies and procedures in your company to accommodate all of these guidelines. And now you must train your staff on your own internal policies and procedures. So sending them to a basic course, I would just, I mean, I don't see anything in writing, but I would say that's probably not going to cut it. And from our HR and legal people that were on a couple days ago, they made it clear that you really should have your own set of policies and procedures. Now, there's a lot of cost to reopening, and I would just give you my own personal opinion on something. If I were a business with a lot of employees and a lot of things that are going to have to change, I would invest in having a firm, whether it's an attorney firm or a consulting firm, I would invest in them looking over my employee manual and my policies and procedures and having them updated to meet all of these guidelines and qualifications, and even maybe help with the training of my employees, because this is a big, huge undertaking. Huge. And I know you guys covered how much that there is. And so if you're ever going to take the time to invest in your company, this might be a good way to do it, because they'll do it far quicker and they'll make sure that you're covered. And most of them are offering services that as things change, they will come back and continue to update and train your employees. So Matt, you put out to everyone the DECD self-certification page and the restaurant guidelines or guidance. And Valeria put out another link for people on free courses to train your employees. So I'm not sure this is really relevant to you guys, but do you have any time frame for when group events will increase from 5?
No,
It's worth asking, right?
Well, you know, every webinar, no matter what the topic, somebody says, I applied for an EIDL loan 47 years ago and I'm about to retire. Do you have any news, you know? So.
No, unfortunately, I'm probably on a lot of the same statewide, calls that you are, Diane, trying to pay attention and see if we can kind of read the tea leaves, but, nothing more.
Again, you have to look at this as a moving target. Much depends on whether or not, once things open, if there's any degree of resurgence of the virus, things could close up again. So we really do have to wait and see.
And again, this is another question that's really more for the DECD, but what do I do about enforcement? So if I'm going to be held responsible because of the self-certification, what do I do if somebody comes into my place of business and doesn't want to follow the rules? Do I call the police?
That's actually a really good question. Enforcement is going to be a challenge. I can speak from my own town side, and being on their reopening task force, I know that our police department has said that restaurants, businesses that are open right now should call them so that they can help, and you don't have a, college student getting berated by somebody, and instead can have that dealt with by somebody else in a safe way. So that would probably be the best guidance at the moment.
It's important to understand that the governor has executed some executive orders. Some things have gone out that says this is the way the state views things. But for the most part, they're leaving it to the individual cities and towns. You have to reach out to your town and find out what their procedures are going to be. I mean, there was that horrible situation where someone was shot to death in a dollar store because of a request to wear a mask. We don't want that happening in Connecticut. Just don't be, again, I keep saying, don't be shy about communicating things. Reach out to the towns, find out what their procedures are, and then stick to those procedures and make sure everybody knows what those procedures are. Make sure your employees understand that if someone isn't complying, these are the steps you take. This is what you do. You don't want people trying to make that up on the fly. That's not going to work. They need to know in advance exactly what they're supposed to do.
I think the other add to that is on the other side, if you think that maybe you don't have to do all of this because there's not necessarily an enforcement process in place, there's going to be a lot of enforcement happening from within the public. So I know that, a lot of people are calling, town halls or the police to say this person's outside doing this, not wearing a mask. So if you think that you can skirt by on some of this stuff, know that there's going to be people coming into your store. They're going to, have an issue with it.
That actually came up on another webinar, and it was a serious concern for people because when the websites Yelp, or I think it is, that came out right with all the reviews that you could do, there was a lot of competition. So sometimes, a competing restaurant would post poor reviews on Yelp about you just because you're a competition, or, your ex-girlfriend that found out you had 3 wives is really pissed off, and so she's decided that she's got her 150 relatives and BFFs write bad reviews about you. So the process about enforcement and reporting, I know that they are working on that, and they're taking it very seriously. I've heard talks about including 211, calling the police, calling the health department. They're taking it seriously, and that they want people to follow the guidelines. So people who are not following guidelines and putting people at risk are a serious issue. However, they also recognize that this could get out of hand very quickly. Like I said, the vengeful ex-employee or ex-boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever is, it could be a potential problem. We certainly don't want police officers and health department people wasting their time with, false, fraudulent reporting. But all of these guidelines do fall under, Greg, thank you for pointing out, executive orders. And if you violate an executive order, that's a Class D felony. That's up to $5,000 in fine and a year in jail. So both the employer has to follow the governor's orders, and so do all of our great citizens of the great state of Connecticut. So be aware of that. And if you don't want to, and you don't want to go to jail, then don't go out. Another quick question. Dental procedures. The CDC is not recommending elective procedures at this point, but the state is saying that we can now open. So most of what we do, like cleanings and such, are elective procedures. We're in the middle. What do we do or do we not? Why would we open if we can't do any procedures? Any thoughts? I think that's the whole point of this webinar.
Right. No, that's a challenge. So I would need to look into this further, but in terms of providing, the appropriate guidance on this.
But again, I think that's the whole point of what you're all saying, is that you need to decide the decision.
You need to decide, and you need to be able to kind of go into the detail here of what the CDC is saying, because I'm hearing recommendation. So is it a recommendation? And then how does that impact what the state is saying, and what supersedes what? And that's what you're going to have to really understand.
Another interesting question. So I'm supposed to do a check for my employees when they come to work to make sure that they are healthy. What happens if I think that they're not because they're showing symptoms, but they're saying they are healthy and they just have allergies? What are my rights? Can I just tell them to go home? And do I have to pay them? So I apologize.
I can jump in here if you like, because I was doing some reading about this just yesterday based on another question. You have the right in a pandemic to send any employee home that you think is presenting symptoms that could endanger the rest of your workforce or your customers. But you do have to pay them, right? You have to pay them sick leave, etc., under those parameters.
And there's money for you to get compensated through the CARES Act. So there's good. So I have a question. Let me ask you guys this question. So I'm a business and I want to open up because I want things to be back to normal. I want life to return to normal. I want to see my customers. I want to go in every day and open my office and look at my beautiful people around me and do what I do. But I'm listening to you and I'm a little nervous about all of these things and some stuff I didn't really think about. How can I best, as just a person that you know, I run my business, but it's been a long time since I've done a big financial analysis. How can what kind of help can you offer me? So if I come and say, Greg, I really don't know if I should open or not. Tell me the steps you'd walk me through, Greg. What questions are you going to ask me? What analysis are you going to do for me so I could get a better, more clear picture of whether I should or shouldn't?
Okay, I think you follow all the 5 steps we laid out at the beginning of this are the steps that you're going to follow. You're going to do an assessment, find out, in fact, are you allowed to open? At what point are you allowed to open? What are the requirements? What do you need to do in terms of the space for your particular business? What kind of training do you need to provide to your employees? What do you need to learn yourself about the particulars related to your industry? Again, just follow along. I don't know if we're making this presentation generally available, but again, just go through those 5 steps. I mean, you have to do some preliminary stuff before we even start talking about the money. I mean, are you able to open? And if so, what do you need to do? So now, you know, if you're going to need to provide partitions, for instance, that's something that we'll need to plug into the calculations because now you've got some costs related to reopening. But we wouldn't have known that unless you went through those first couple of steps first. So go through those steps. Now we have a basis for beginning to put together a financial model to assess whether or not it makes sense for you to open now, what it's going to cost you to open up, how much you can expect in terms of revenue. For instance, if you're required to reduce your capacity by 50%, we can take that into account. Or if you're required to take your capacity, whatever your capacity is, we can take that into account. Whether or not no matter what the capacity is, how much space do you have outside? And so maybe even if you could reduce it by 50%, maybe you only have the space to accommodate 15%. We can take that into account when building a financial model. So again, follow those steps. I'm more than happy to work through all of that with you, and then we can come to some rational assumptions about what to expect. Does that help?
I'm raising chickens in my office, believe it or not. So I put myself on mute so you don't hear that quack, 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 you know. I apologize. And I know we're past 1, but if you could just one more follow-up question. So Greg, I've decided, okay, I'm going to hold off and I'm going to wait. I've done some initial things. It's just too much. Whether I can afford it or not, it's not even the question. It's just too overwhelming right now. But let's say in a month from now, am I able to go to you and say, Greg, how are other restaurants, for example, if I'm a restaurant, how are other restaurants doing? Will you have any of that data? Are you working with DECD or the state or anybody else to pull together some data to see how restaurants are doing after they after they opened up?
Well, that's a really good point. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that, no matter what your industry is. You don't have to be the first ones to open your door. Let other folks do it first, find out how they're doing, and then you can make a even more educated assessment about what the next steps need to be. We have in the SBDC, we have thousands of clients. We can pull together information from those clients, even if it's only anecdotal. And I understand that's not the best kind of data, but even initially, you're going to want to try to get a relatively good snapshot of what's going on locally, because what might be happening nationally may not really apply to you. So yeah, we can talk to our fellow advisors. We can find out from them how their individual clients are doing in their particular industry, and we can share that information with you. We're not going to tell you, what your competitor down the specifics about what your competitor down the street is doing. We won't do that. That's not fair. But we can aggregate information, and we can share that with you, so you get a sense of, all right, well, this is more or less how this industry has responded to this emergency, and very likely I should expect the same kinds of results.
I think that's great and very important that it's done close. I was on another conference call, and a restaurant owner was saying, "Oh, it's been great. We're doing awesome. There's really not a lot of change. Blah blah blah." And I'm like, "Well, where are you from?" And he's from Florida. I'm like, "Yeah, okay. So maybe yesterday at lunchtime I could sit outside and have a nice lunch, but by dinner time it was way too cold for me, and I wouldn't have gone out to dinner. But in Florida, it was almost the other way around, lunchtime was a little too hot and dinner was perfect, but they are still serving 2 meals a day outside. So the regional information, I think, is really important, and that'll be great. And maybe we will have you back in a month or so and do another one, like update and how's everybody doing. That would be really great. For those of you that are on our call, our hour is up a little bit longer. Thank you, Greg and Matt, for being here. It's extremely informative. And Valeria, you too. Thank you very much. I didn't mean to leave you out. Anyone has any questions, we will send this webinar out in our newsletter, a recording of it. It will also be on our newsletter, the link to our YouTube channel. Your contact information will go out to everybody also, but if you ever have a question and you need to get a hold of the SVDC, you can certainly email me. You guys have my email, or respond to any of our newsletters, and I will get you whatever that information is. And again, if you would like us to throw out your EIDL number to poor New England director Wendell, Wendell Davis, be happy to do that for you. And again, Matt and Greg and Valeria, thank you for coming. I hope everyone stays safe. Keep an eye on podcasts that are webinars coming up. I have one on Monday with Joe Courtney, and I have one on Tuesday with Senator Blumenthal. They're going to give us some updates. Also on Tuesday, a webinar about cost estimators. If you're going to actually be able to go online and shop for medical procedures and pick the cheapest one if that's what you'd like. So there's a webinar about that on Tuesday, and a whole bunch of other ones almost every day. So keep checking on our website and our newsletter. Again, thank you, gentlemen and young lady, for attending, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.